can start off with the first ever school that I was able to come across, and it was located at the southwest corner of Second and Chestnut, in a building owned by Crystal Meyer. First teacher was Claire Davis. Can you see that at all? Okay. It was operated for only 2 months and was financed by the parents, so there were only a handful of kids in the school. And it really was only 3 years after the first train came through here on the 4th of July in 1872. So there was an annual meeting in 1877, and don't forget that Marshall was a township at one time until it was incorporated. So it's going to be mentioned in here a few times as the town of Marshfield. But this is an approximate location, and that's the best I can do for an imitation of President Trump. It's where Scotty's Pizza is right now. The original school, original frame building that they built was on the corner of 3rd and Chestnut. We bought up the lots of 13, 14, and 15 in Block L. It's where the parking lot for the Marshfield News Herald was prior to the Wenzel Plaza being built. So I took a picture of approximately where that building had been located. There were stories in the papers about how people had to walk on boards to get across the mud and dirt to get to the door of the school, and made it rather interesting, but they were very proud of it. It lists some of the teachers that were there. They had as many as 40 kids in 1879 already. They traded that location for a larger lot at 627 South Central, which is the pick and save area. Once they got that, they sold this to the city or to the township. This building, that was the first firehouse. It got caught up in a blaze in 1887 and was destroyed. Central Avenue School, and also became known as the high school, they constructed a 4-room schoolhouse on the east side of Central Avenue in the 600 block. And again, that's Washington Square. It was on the south edge of the fledgling town. It was surrounded by woods, and it was used extensively as a community center. The year the city was incorporated, the population of 461 school-age kids, with 125 of them attending public school. What I found out through the research is that not all those other kids did not go to school. The majority of them were in St. John's School eventually. As St. John's developed, they probably had 2 or 3 times more kids in their school than the city schools did. 3-year high school was established. That shows more than 7 kids, but that is a graduating class with 11 kids. And that's how Chrissy they started looking when they were done with high school. This is a picture, best of my knowledge, of that first building. Again, it was located in the 600 block of South Central, at the edge of town at the time, in 1881. They decided that they needed something bigger because, and that's been a theme all the way through this school history, is that the kids just kept coming, and the city was getting bigger, and they just needed more room, and they did what they could to keep up with the population. So they decided to construct a new building on the South Central site, and they used Marshfield brick in the construction. It opened in 1890. It was now a 4-year high school rather than a 3-year. There's 6 classrooms with an office and other rooms. It was considered one of the best in northern Wisconsin. During the course of the year, the entire school moved into new quarters from the old one. Grade courses comprised 9 years of work for an average student and 4 years of additional high school. Now they moved that original building down to the southwest corner, or in the middle of the block on the 300 block of South Maple Avenue, behind the old City Hall on the corner over there, the old City Hall. But they vacated to that, they moved it down there, and it was used as a City Hall. So An interesting thing about the high school was renovated in 1895. The same time that the Fourth Ward School or Lincoln School was built, with 3-story. The 3rd story was finished for laboratory purposes. Drinking faucets were installed on each floor from the basement up. Now this is the interesting part. The water installation was at no cost to the school district. The clause in the franchise granted to the electric and water department allowed for covering the costs for manpower and materials to the schools be free of cost. That's a gift from Mr. Upham at the time, so. This is a picture of Washington School, as about as new as it could be. You'll notice the tower, that's a feature in a lot of the school buildings that were built after that, including the Fourth Ward School. Jefferson School had a tower on it at one time. And then just some interesting pictures like the May Day celebration on the corner of 6th and Central. Randy Gershman's office is on the other corner, coming south on the northwest corner. And these are some pictures from the 6th grade of Washington School. I'm sorry I don't have a date on them, but it looks like they fit very well into those buildings. A lot of kids in each classroom, none of this 15 kids for class size, proper class size stuff. Going to a Catholic school, we had 54 in a classroom, and 1 nun, and we didn't keep, so. These folks are out in front of the school building as well. This is one of the nicer pictures of Washington School. Many people will tell you that are a little bit older, how the fire escape was as good as the swings on the playground to entertain themselves. But it was a pretty nice looking school, and it's functional, and you can see by now the tower is taken off to the front of it. This is looking at it from the southwest. Got another one a little bit later, probably right before the demolition. About that time, about 19, there isn't a whole lot in between, but I'm following just Washington School itself. But in 1955, they decided that they needed a new Washington School. They were going to build it on the corner of Oak and 5th and 6th in between. It was property that the city already owned, and remember at that time, the city was very involved with the school financing because it was what they called it, it's gonna escape me. But they had a lot of say in what schools did as far as spending money, and I'll think of it as I go on. But it was the former site of McKinley High School that burned down, so they used that, and the design for it ended up being a 2-story building because of the lot was really small. This is the same time that Lincoln School was considered to be replaced, and so they designed the two as close as they could to being matching sisters, and construction and everything all took place at the same time. I think one of the features in both the schools was a curved bus unloading canopy in the circle driveway, which made them stand out. This is how they planned where the school was gonna go. No, not really. This is the members of the school board, and they were staking out the front yard of the old McKinley and getting an idea where things were gonna be as they laid it out one sunny summer afternoon. I'm sure the engineers helped them out a little bit too. This is actually when they started digging the hole. It's looking from the southwest towards the corner of Oak and 5th, and it's probably the frost walls and the foundation for the gymnasium and the music room that used to be in Washington School. This is in 1955, 56. Of course, when the Washington School got done, then they had to demolish the old McKinley, or the old grade school, Washington School. There are some pictures available about that. That'd be a sad day. And you look in the background, they're building a new Marshfield Clinic at the same time, across the street. 4-story Marshfield Clinic. The Oaks Avenue Washington School was dedicated, 1957. Over 500 people had toured, attended for the tour. And at the same night, they did the new Lincoln School as well. Washington School site on Central Avenue was sold for $153,000 to the Washington Square Incorporated. Was a combination of businessmen in town, including Wing and Carroll, Rumhafer, and they developed Washington Square, which was the first supermarket in town. It had a canopy that came from the parking lot up to the building that you could stay out of the rain when you're getting out of your car and going to the store, and then the Marshfield office for the Wisconsin Gas Company was also there. So the building itself was tore down about 10 years ago to make way for more longer than that, for the pick and save. But the Wisconsin Gas Company building is still there, and it's been renovated, and it's being used by Miller Publishing. They did add on to that. They added on 4 classrooms in the late 60s. And then in 2005, there was a referendum to build a new building to replace the Oak Street site. And they had land that they owned on 11th and South Lincoln. And that's the school, Washington School, you know, today. That opened up on October 15th. Or September 5th, but it was dedicated October 15th, 2006. These are some pictures of an early picture of Washington School, where I went to kindergarten. And the puking twirler on the corner, lean in, you go faster. Probably cracked a lot of heads. And then the Washington School about 1996. Beautiful schools. Here's some kindergarten pictures. Don't know the dates, but I'd have to say it's probably early 60s, late 50s, early 60s. And this is a construction site for the new one on 11th Street, back in 2005. And this is a picture of it today. So, there was also a sister school built at the same time, and it was Madison School on the east side. They went hand in hand, and their designs were pretty much identical. Now I go back to the high school, which was in the Washington School building. 1898, they decided to build that new high school on Oak Street, McKinley High School, and they were going to borrow $18,500 to build it. They debated the site for a long time because so many people had different ideas where the new school should go. And at the time, 5th and Oak was like on the far west side of the city. But then if you look at history, they had a tendency to do that because the city's going to build around the schools. And once they put that building up, their houses popped up on 5th, 6th, 4th Street. And they decided on that site, however. Doors of the new school opened in January 1900, and of course it was considered one of the best in northern Wisconsin. Cost of $18,500 with 6 schools, classrooms, 120 students, and 4 teachers. A couple different timeline pictures. Best I could figure is 1900. McKinley High School in 1906. It was a grand old school, and I think of the postcards that people bought through the years, the most photographed schools were most photographed cards that you could get were the schools and the hospital. I guess if they came here to you saw that, and it was really something, so. It's been added on to, it stood up on the hill. I know from, personally that there's even part of the foundation that's visible in the springtime, once they tore that building down, that, the frost brought up the stone walls enough that you could see the outline of the schools behind the Washington School. Of course, once the trees started growing, it looked even better. But it was photographed a lot. It was the pride of the community. And then in October of 1936, there was a fire that destroyed the building. They fought it for 5 hours. They used 325 gallons of water, which in comparison to, say, the downtown fire, it's about a third of the water that they used on the downtown fire a couple of years ago. Office records and athletic equipment were saved. Of course, it helped that the athletic director and coach Murphy at the time was there when it was happening. So, almost 5,000 volumes of the school library were destroyed, including typewriters, school books, personal belongings. Below the fire could be seen for, they claimed, 25 miles away, so it was quite a fire. The shell of the building smoldered for days. There are stories where the students were only out of school for 1 day after the fire, and in that day, the administration for the school district planned a whole new timeline for the Purdy building, Purdy Junior High, and they used every conceivable space, and they had school open from 6:30 to 7 o'clock in the morning till sometimes 8 o'clock at night. But everybody got educated, well, the powers to be argued about where a good site for the new school would be, so there were several of them, or at least a half dozen or more, and including where the armory is, including the fairgrounds, but they picked the site on the far east side of town, where there were no houses, and decided that that would be the place they wanted to build. And it was a 17-acre site, and it was built for the most part with WPA, with the federal government helping out. And you can see it took almost 2 years to eventually to get the construction started from when the fire at McKinley happened. And that's just a burned out shell compared to what it was the day before. So. High school, called 1940 High School on East 4th Street. Construction began in December 1938. If you're ever in that building and you get down into the basement part of it, it's not going to go anywhere. If I would be somewhere when the tornadoes come, I would like to be in that building, because it's poured concrete. It's just solid as a rock. The contractor compiled a list for the construction. There were 13 cars of cement, solid cars of cement. That's like 21,000 bags, 30 ton of sand, or 3,000 ton of sand, 3,700 ton of gravel, 700 ton of sand for masonry, 270 ton of unseen reinforced steel, 36 ton of structural steel, 291,000 face brick, 49,000 common brick from Marshfield Brick Company, and partition tiles, there were 41,000 of those inside the walls. There were 7,000 yards of dirt excavated from the site. 60,000 units of glazed tile were installed. 32,000 square feet of asphalt tile were used. 305 cabinet doors. 8,700 glass blocks used for natural lighting in the library and the gymnasium. 253 regular doors manufactured by the Rods Company, constructed of birch and walnut, and then they laid ebony and holly. The administrative offices were finished in walnut. So that was the pride of the Rodas company at the time, and a lot of the doors are still in the building. And when they say inlaid, they're designed just to be beautiful, and they're a big feature in that building. So there's a lot of community pride involved with that. Of course, the landmark is the tower. It's 3 complete flights above the rest of the building. The intent was to install a telescope and a dome to be used as a observatory. Again, it was outside of town basically, so there wasn't a lot of city light. The dome roof sits upon a mechanism which turns the entire unit using only one hand, ropes and pulleys to operate the vertical slide to open it up for the telescope. The telescope was never installed. It was a grand dream. The closest they ever came to one was not quite a tabletop model. It wasn't big enough to fill the void there, so it just never happened. But they had a dream, so they probably built that instead of a gymnasium for basketball games or something. Open house was held in 1940 on March 16th and 17th. The new football stadium was dedicated in 1941. And I'll quote, it was probably the finest high school stadium in Wisconsin. It seated 4,000 spectators. Concrete masonry structure which utilized the old brick from the burned out shell of McKinney High School. Lighted for night games, which they never had the opportunity to have. Prior to this, high school games were played at the fairgrounds. So underneath the vinyl siding that's on the outside of Beal Stadium right now, the walls in the stadium, the shell is a brick from the McKinley High School. They put the vinyl siding on probably in the mid-2000, about 2005, 2006. You should be able to see it now because they're going to tear one side of the bleachers down. And in order to do that, they'll have to take the plastic off and you'll be able to see the brick again. But being a Works Progress Administration project, it was not uncommon to have those projects and put people to work. And they had people put to work just chopping the cement off of the concrete off of the bricks. In November of '41, the stadium was named after Fred A. Beal. It was endorsed by the community over an alternative, which was a cheese bowl. Well, thank God they called it Beal Stadium. Cheese bowl. But we were a hub at the time, and more cheese went through here than anywhere else. So it was common that for several years after the school was built that the senior classes had their graduation ceremonies at Beal Stadium. I just noted that 1959 was one of those events, and there were 156 seniors that graduated and had their event in Beal Stadium. Here's some timeline pictures of it. A little bit after it was built. What's nice about this, and I have seen the blueprints for it, but there's really no way to copy them to make them presentable, is that besides the building itself being what it is, the entire grounds were a project in itself. A famous landscape architect laid out the sidewalks, the trees, every tree, every bush. The sidewalks connected with this and that. And you can still see some signs of it, although there's been some additions and stuff put on that kind of take away from it. There was a fountain here in the picture. But sidewalk from the stadium to the tennis courts in the back were in line with each other, and everything was all laid out. And there was a variety of trees and bushes used on that site. And the first thing that suffered from doing that was all the elm trees around Beal Stadium eventually reached the point in the 70s and 80s where the elm disease came through and wiped out pretty much every tree that was shading Beal Stadium. And some of the through the years, some have held up, but there's some replanting of some other trees and stuff in the meantime to replace the ones that are gone down. That's the original Beal Stadium, right after it opened. Sorry, it's a picture from a newspaper. That's the best I could get. And then it's one just last year, Beal Stadium set for a football game. I worked for the school district for 14 years, and my job at 12:30 every day, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, was to mow Beal Stadium. And then on Fridays, we got it ready for ball games. And people like to play in that stadium because you're so close to the game. And newer stadiums now where you're half a block away and you gotta look down on everything. But it was a nice, cozy place to watch a football game. Some more timeline pictures. Besides having the football stadium, there were 2 ponds that were part of that site that could be flooded for hockey. In fact, one of the hydrants is still on the property. They just had to open them up and they would fill in and freeze over, and hockey was big back then, and that supported that, so. And I wanted to get a picture, I'm sorry, of the flagpole, which was taken down a few years ago, but it was majestic. It had all kinds of writing on it. It stood out there by itself, and, but they sought to demolish it, so. Probably for safety's sake. It's a nice building, you know, it's a pride of the community and has served the community very well. Fortunately, they chose to refurbish it a couple of years ago, and they did a beautiful job refurbishing it. Because there was talk at one time of taking the dome off, and that didn't go over very well, so they, in fact, encapsulated it. I don't think anything's functional anymore, but with the mechanism that I mentioned before, it would be very easy to turn that. It's just all mechanically, it's all up there, but then now it's closed because it had a tendency to leak. So there was an addition put on when the new high school was built on Becker Road, to expand for the need that they needed to expand for making that a junior high after they left Purdy building. So this all will catch up with a couple of other buildings here, but I'm trying to do them in order as we go here. So, but in '69, before that even, people began to realize that they needed more room for the high school. Eventually they bought 60 acres out on East Becker Road where the high school is today. It got to be quite a tugging contest because at the time they were pretty much partners with the townships, and the townships didn't see the value in having a swimming pool and a field house and an auditorium. Of course, that all cost money, and there were some very interesting meetings that went on back then. Eventually, it all came to be, though, and field house can seat 3,000 people, and as many as 5,000 for other events, graduation and otherwise. It was completed in 1968, so the 68-69 class was the first class to go through it, and I happened to be in the second class, 69, 70, when we were sophomores and went out there. So. After my freshman year at Columbus, which was so eventful. The high school had a swimming pool. So. Open house took place in 1969. Former high school building was transformed to the new location for junior high, as I mentioned, and Purdy became a full-time home for Mid-State Technical School. Then in 1992, they decided they needed more room. They added 31 more classrooms at the high school. That was completed in 1994. These are some construction pictures of the high school on Becker Road. Said they built it in a swamp, but I don't know. This Mr. Hanrath, he was the school superintendent at the time. You can see the shelves for the commons area going up. And of course, the foundation, the basements, the field house being constructed. other parts of the school being put together. This is a school in about 1980. About 1994. And so much of that has changed now that, and a lot of things happened in between, about 1996 till now, but the most interesting thing was probably is the new sports complex. It was built in the last year or so. This is under construction, and that's a picture of it almost completed, except for a little landscaping and some touch-up work on the track and the lining the track. But that's another pride of Marshfield that everybody talks about. I'd like to go back through the years again, back to the first big school building. Because the first frame structure was the one on 3rd and Chestnut, but the first ward school in 1889 was built on the corner of Blodgett and Maple, or Blodgett and Chestnut. At the time, Blodgett was known as the D Street. That's the actual building, and once it was, once the new first ward school was built on Cleveland Street, they moved this building to across from the mill, and Upham used it as an office building for several years. The Koenigs owned Marshfield Milling Company. In 1958, they were going to build a new office building, and they moved the building back off on the site, out of the way. And I just talked with John Koenig the other day. I said, "Did that building go anywhere?" And he said, "No, once the new building was done and they were done with this one, it was demolished." I was hoping maybe it'd be sitting out there somewhere, but it was a mighty fine building too on its own. But you know, they outgrew. It was a 2-room Queen Anne style, like 90 seats. This is gives you an idea of the smaller circle where the first ward school was, St. John's School in Church, in the upper corner. They purchased lots up on C Street, which ended up being Cleveland Street. It's a wedge shape where right now Grant Mini Park is. They constructed a 2-story brick building, 4 oversized classrooms and restrooms, state-of-the-art furnaces to heat the building. The cost of the new structure was $10,000. Mentioned Upham bought the old building and moved it over to the second Walnut. Each one of those schools in 1906 got a different name. The first ward school, the fourth ward school, they named all the schools after presidents. So this one was named Grant School after that. The fourth ward school was named Lincoln. The school on Central Avenue was called Washington. And names went with them as they either moved or were demolished. There was an addition made into this building on Cleveland Street to add, probably for the kindergarten, but this is a picture of West C Street, and this kind of gives you a layout. This is a picture of it, big building, oversized classrooms. It was rather majestic. I know they had an awful time a few years later when this was demolished in the very early 1960s, and they eventually put Oak Street through. And in the meantime, they pulled it back in again, but a lot of the foundation was there yet when they started building the street, so it caused a few problems for the city construction people. In 1960, they talked about having to replace that building. So they bought some land up across from where the hospital and the clinic are now, but it was really no man's land. Oak Street didn't go through. Calshed Street just went down and curved onto what is Oak, and then Ive Street, that was basically that neighborhood. And they dug in and they built a brand new elementary school to replace the one on Cleveland Street. And I don't have a year on the picture, but there were several class pictures taken, and that was the site for taking the pictures that particular year. It was dedicated in 1963. And then of course it got bigger and bigger. And this is the first 4-track elementary school. The grand school was a deal worked out between the clinic and the city, or the school, where they would take over the old grand school. It was built in 1963, 60, and the new 4-track school where it is today. This clinic, I ended up getting that building for $2 million, and they use it today for part of the research and for other offices. 775 new students, 78 full-time, part-time professional and support staff. It opened up in 1992. Another picture of it today. And this is the old Grant School. As the clinic is using it, it's about the only angle you can get a picture of because of all the other buildings that are built around it now. But it still serves a purpose. Fourth Ward School, which is Lincoln School, was located on the corner of Vine and 4th Street. It was built about the same time that the new building was built down on North and South Central Avenue. Lots purchased for 8, 9, and 10 of Block 98, which is where the old fire station is. The 4-room, 2-story brick building. And constructed of red pressed brick, 2 stories in a basement with concrete floor, closets, lavatories, modern heating with 2 large furnaces, polished oak stairs. First and second floors each featured 2 spacious, well-lighted classrooms with closed closets, hardwood floors, and planished slate blackboards. I looked up planished, and it's taking rough slate and smoothing them out so you can use it for something. So I learned something every day. These are some pictures of it. Again, one with a dome, a tower, and one without. One in the lower corner here is probably a little closer to when it was demolished. But it was used for a couple different things through the years besides just a schoolroom. During the Depression, they closed it for a year, and several relief offices of the city and the state were located there to serve people. Yeah, the 33, 34-year due effects of the Great Depression. So the Marshfield Relief Department. Then in 1955, 56, the same time as Washington School, same architect, they designed 2 buildings to be sister buildings. The 90-acre Schnitzler estate was chosen for the new site on 17th Street and Falker Avenue, where it's located today. And it was obtained for $12,000. Bids for construction were opened in 1956. And this is a picture not too long after it was built. You can see houses starting to pop up in the background. And of course nowadays that's all full, no houses, including mine. Year 2000, and then that was before the renovation in 2003, where they changed the front entrance to Falker Avenue. You can see just like in Washington, it has a curved bus drop-off area, which was a trademark for the buildings at the time. A lot of the same stories. I mean, it's same as Washington. Many of the key features were identical in both buildings. Multi-purpose rooms were designed as combination cafeteria, gymnasium, and auditorium, and natural illumination from narrow frosted windows. Prior to that, the public schools did not have hot lunch. It's about the time that the schools took over the rural schools that Washington and Lincoln and Jefferson and Grant started to have cafeterias or serve hot lunch during the noon hour. Dedication of that building for Lincoln is the same night as Washington, 1957. And the old school site was returned to the city in 1961 for a fire station. It was constructed there. It was called the Fiscal Control Board. The city council could say if the school could spend the money they wanted to spend. I felt the ill effects of that when I was in high school because they cut out driver's ed. So I was 2 months shy of my 17th birthday before I ever got my license. Proud of I'm still alive today. In 2003, there was a referendum to revamp the Lincoln School. They did not go for a complete rebuild, but they did a huge reconstruct a lot of parts of the building and converting the existing gymnasium and the library and media center, because that school and Washington School both had relocatables on them that were only temporary, but were there for over 30 years. They were basically a shell that were built in the mobile home factory, and were only temporary. So on September 5th, 2006, was the first day in this building. A happy day for everybody that went to school there. Jefferson School, that was in the neighborhood of Cedar and 11th. This was built in 1911, and it cost $12,000 to construct this schoolhouse. This also had a tower on it originally. It was taken down. And it shows here where it was located. South Cedar Avenue, South Maple, is where the dance studio is today. This school was closed in 2002. It was listed for sale because Nasonville went to a four-track system, four-track school. So there was discussion about they could save on a lot of stuff if they put everybody under one roof. And the reeks of construction at Nasonville, or from a 1 to 2 track school, freed up Jefferson School, which was a 1 track school. These are some dated pictures of date line pictures. That's with an addition that was put on in a few years after the original, again with the tower taken down. And that school, until it was taken down, had the old wood floors, creaky wood floors. It was every bit old. There were 4 classrooms in the tower part, and the rest was a little more modern. It was built in the 50s. Purdy School originally was built in 1980, or started in 1918. World War I got in the middle of it all. It was originally named Marshfield School, and that was changed after the death of Willard Purdy, and the community honored him by naming the school after Purdy, being a World War I hero. He saved several of his comrades in an act of courage, and lost his life because of it. It opened in 1920, 7th, 8th, and 9th grades, about 300 students, and vocational and school enrollment of 100. So it doubled as both the the junior high school and the vocational school. This is the original part of the building. Of course, it wasn't big enough, and additional land was purchased on Chestnut Street between where the existing school was and 4th Street, and construction began, which when it was completed, it covered the whole entire block. This is also the home for the school for the deaf. Originally there were 5 boys and 2 girls in it. 78 men and 98 women attended the evening vocational classes. So junior high by day and vocational school by night. That continued for several years. Major expansion. Included an all-school assembly, which was a beautiful auditorium. They also constructed the gymnasium, which housed all the Marshfield varsity basketball games. It was very small. The seating was up above up in the rafters, but it was used forevermore and served a purpose till the new high school was built on Becker Road. The new gymnasium was dedicated in 1927. In fact, was known as one of the largest indoor athletic courts in the state. Marshall won the first game 24-2, over 1,000 spectators. Some more pictures. This is looking northeast from the corner of 4th and Chestnut as well. Uh, 1968, 65, when the new high school was built on Becker Road is when all the changes were made to make that the existing high school on 4th Street accommodate all the other people that were coming over from the Purdy building, including a lecture room and several new classrooms and a cafeteria. Then when the school vacated the building, the BTAE, or the Mid-State Technical Institute, took over the entire building and did for several years. Madison School is located down on Apple Street between Daggy Street and Becker Road. It was built in 1951. Doors were opened in 1963 for an addition that they had put on because there were so many kids. And then in 2006 was the first day in the new school that's there today. As the city kept growing, there's more need for more room. And like I said, that's a constant thing. No getting around it. So, then the old school was demolished in 2006, but it had gone through several transformations. This is already with the additional school, additional classrooms on it, the 70s as well. And this is 1998. Can't show the whole building because it goes the whole block, but it's functional. And this is the new Madison School between Palmetto and on Palmetto between Daggy and Becker Road. Then I'll touch on the outside schools because they're part of the school district. Nasonville School, located out on Highway 10, just past Nasonville Gary. This is an old Nasonville school building. It was originally part of the town of Rock. I've got more information on it, but it's something I'm going to add to it eventually. But they also had a new building built in 2001. Again, taking it from a one-track with 6 grades, 1st through 6th, one classroom for each, and then turning it into a 2-track school system and the kindergarten. Built for $3.2 million. And some of that money came from selling the Purdy School building into being refurbished into a assisted living facility. Tremont School, which we'll touch on next, out in Chile. East Tremont was brought about because the people in the neighborhood figured they needed a school. They got organized. 1959 was the first day of school in the building. There were several rural schools where the kids had been going to school, and let's put them all in one building. It was permanently closed in 2001. It had also about 70 rural students in grades K through 2. Because all those classes are attending Masonville School. School forest is worth mentioning because it was a community project. Some of the students from the high school had attended Trees for Tomorrow, and they learned about larger schools and the school forest that they had, and they wanted one too. So there was a deed for 240 acres in the town of Rock, just east of Lindsay on Highway N. We obtained that in 1956. Became a reality. An additional 40 acres of adjoining land was bought in 1957. Concrete slab for the building out there was poured in 1958, and then with the help of school teachers and school students, they built the building, including the stonework. Mr. Knapp at the time was principal. I guess he was a mason, and did masonry stuff on the side, and of course Mr. Halbitz and several other teachers that some of us know led the students in the building that. And a few years later, the man-made pond was created using wetlands, which I don't know if we can do today, but they did, and it worked. It's a spring-fed pond. It ranges from 1 to 8 feet depth, and then another 40 acres was purchased in 1963, so it makes a total of 320 acres outside outdoor classroom, which is used all year round. If it's not for school, it's used for cross-country skiing and for hiking. It's really big asset to the school district. These are some pictures of the building. I've got the rural schools listed. Back in 1957, they formed what they called the Joint Marshfield School District, which bought up all the old rural schools, and the students from those schools attended the Marshfield Schools one way or the other by busing. And there's a list of them here, and for the sake of time I won't read them all, but there isn't a rural school around here that was left in business after that all took place. It only took 3 or 4 years to complete that transformation. Here's some real pictures. I don't have identification on them. I think one is Mill Creek. And I wish I had identification on them, but I don't, I'm sorry. Except this one, Shady Lane, which was on Highway Y, west of town, about a half mile west of the old cheese factory. This is an indoor picture, some outdoor pictures. The only reason I have these is my mother's in one of them. She had a collection of them, so I shared it with you. I've got stuff on the parochial schools. I'll just go through them quickly. It's probably a whole other presentation, but this is the original, and I won't read a whole lot about them, but this is the original St. John's School. Again, I use a Sanborn map to show you its location compared to other things. Right across from Columbia Park, where it is today. Some pictures from St. John's. The reason I know that is because there's some white collars in there. And it matches 1897, which is the construction here. Unfortunately, that was destroyed by fire in 1943. You don't know, it was some Sunday afternoon, it went up in flames, and they used 500,000 gallons of water on this building. It housed 410 students at the time. And here's a more modern school at the same time. As we know it today. Emmanuel was another school that was pretty popular in town. It still is. It was a new home for the School of the Deaf for a while. I'll touch on that briefly. But the old building was demolished in 1959, and actually it has been always in a newer building that was built in 1960 or prior to 1958. And, 5 classrooms and multi-purpose room. And this shows approximately where it was too, according to Sanborn. The church is in the upper pink, and the school is set back a little bit off of Chestnut Street and 7th Street. These are some pictures of Emmanuel. Different color. But that was taken down as well as the church eventually too. These are some pictures of what we see today. Sacred Heart has a story that goes on and on, but the big thing is it started out as a school church. And it got to the point where they needed a new church, and then they needed more classroom space. So they ended up building a church, which took a load off of this building because they were housing the church inside the auditorium. You can see Jefferson School in the background. Functional, but they had 157 students back in 1917. And 4 thoroughly modern classrooms were added to the school in 1932. And this is what we know, except a few years ago, of the school and the church. And this is what we know of today with the demolition of the school. Prior to that, the convent had been demolished, but the church and the rectory remain on site. Our Lady of Peace came along in 1946, 1948. They actually purchased enough land for the elementary school, the church, the rectory, convent, and Catholic high school at the time, and they all went up one after the other. This is a little bit older picture of the school, and at one time the church was on the end. When the new church was built, the one on the end was turned into a gymnasium. Columbus High School was located behind it. Columbus was built, the first graduating class was in 1952. That's the layout of Columbus High School. Convent just past that, and Our Lady of Peace in the background. Another picture of Columbus. School of Nursing, School Sisters, Sisters of the Sorrowful Mother, were located at St. Joseph's Hospital. They had a huge convent there. The convent was basically to train nurses and future nuns. But there were other people interested in becoming a nurse as well, so they took on the task of teaching women to be nurses. There was also an addition put on that with the auditorium in 1954. And the stage was functional with lighting and sound, so it ended up being a community facility as well. The UW, groundbreaking for that was on November 22nd, 1963. If anybody remembers what day that is. It was a rainy day, same day that President Kennedy was killed. It's a 67-acre site originally on the far west side of the city on the end of 5th Street. They had several additions to it in the meantime, and worth noting, I can't possibly do it all here, but this will be updated at some point too, so. Some earlier pictures of it, and some of the later ones with the original buildings being up in front. In later years, they built the gymnasium, and they built the connector buildings, and of course, a arts building, which is used extensively. The city of Marshfield and the county of Wood own the building, and the state of Wisconsin puts the people and things inside of it. It's been a partnership since back in 1963, when they were arguing about where it was gonna be. So they both decided to share the costs, and I think, of course, Marshfield came out better for the deal, but it's another sign of pride in the community. The Mid-State Technical College, it came to be because of the sharing that they did of the facilities with the Purdy building. They had it to themselves for quite a while after the junior high moved out to 4th Street. Eventually they built the new building in 1991. They dedicated the new building on the end of 5th Street, past the university. And it's fortunate that we have those kind of things in our community to take advantage of. School for the Deaf, I couldn't go without mentioning that. It was established in 1917. 5 teachers and 33 students in 1936. 6 are hard of hearing and the remainder are completely deaf. There's no large school for the deaf in the state except Milwaukee. Marshfield Schools provide the facilities and supplies to operate the school. The schools are supported financially by tuition paid by the students and the State Department of Education. Board and room is also paid for by the state for students living from out of town. With the overcrowding of the Purdy building, since McKinley High School was destroyed, the School for the Deaf was relocated temporarily to the Lutheran School, like I mentioned. On the 14th anniversary of the school, 7 students graduated from the 8th grade and 1 from the high school. Due to lack of space and lack of qualified teachers, enrollment was capped at 35 students. Also 12 on a waiting list in 1946. And then because the teachers didn't want to sign a contract in 1947, it was closed. The teachers were transferred to other locations in the city, outside the city. There's also the alternative school, I wanted to be complete, and also the Dominion House for Prayer, out at the old Washington School. In alternative school, I'd like to do more on that, but for time I didn't do it. It's ended up being a very big asset to the community, an asset to the kids who could be involved with it. It's an alternative for them to just walk around doing nothing. So, and it's been well received. It's earned a lot of respect in the community, and it deserves more than just a line like that. There. Hopefully I learned something new today.